There are storms you can see coming, dark clouds rolling in, winds shifting, a warning in the air. And then, there are the storms that live inside the people you trust the most. For years, she believed her marriage was steady, predictable, even safe. The kind of life people describe as comforting or solid. But what if safety is only an illusion? What if calm waters are just a mask hiding something dangerous beneath? On that night, the world outside erupted. Lightning splitting the sky, rain hammering the roof. Yet the real storm was brewing behind closed doors, in whispered words, in strange new habits she tried to ignore, and in the moment she needed her husband the most, she discovered a truth she was never meant to see, a truth the storm didn't just reveal, it amplified. Because sometimes nature doesn't create chaos. It exposes it. Before the night that changed everything, her life looked almost painfully ordinary. The kind of routine that people describe as stable, even enviable. She woke up each morning to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the familiar silhouette of her husband moving around as if they were part of the same quiet choreography. To anyone looking in from the outside, theirs was a marriage built on predictability, on gentle conversations over breakfast and evenings spent deciding trivial things like what movie to watch or which takeout to order. And for a long time, she believed that was enough. That consistency was safety. That familiarity was love. But looking back, she remembers tiny moments, forgotten glances, distracted answers, a strange heaviness in his sighs, that didn't make sense then, but now echo like warnings she wasn't ready to hear. It's strange how the human heart can sense something is off long before the mind allows itself to admit it. But she pushed these thoughts away, convincing herself she was overthinking, that every marriage goes through phases, that silence wasn't always a sign of distance. In a way, she almost wanted the illusion more than the truth. If she had paid closer attention, she might have noticed how his laughter changed first. It wasn't loud or full anymore. It was shorter, clipped, as if he rationed each smile. Then came his sudden habit of staying up late, pacing the living room long after she'd gone to bed, claiming he had emails to finish or calls to catch up on. Harmless excuses, or at least that's what she told herself. She remembered sitting on the couch one evening, watching him scroll on his phone with a look she couldn't quite decipher, not anger, not sadness, something more complicated. Like he was standing on the edge of a choice he wasn't prepared to make. When she asked him if he was okay, he gave the kind of half-hearted, "I'm fine" that people offer when they're anything but fine. Still, she let it go. Because loving someone sometimes means giving them the benefit of the doubt, even when your instincts whisper otherwise. She didn't want confrontation. She wanted peace. And sometimes peace feels easier to maintain when you look away from the cracks forming beneath your feet. She didn't yet realize that small cracks, when ignored long enough, can grow into a fault line capable of splitting an entire life apart. What unsettled her most wasn't the arguments. They barely had any. It was the absence of them. Disagreements used to mean something. That they both cared enough to fight, to defend their feelings, to push for understanding. But lately, he agreed with everything she said, even when it didn't make sense. If she suggested a plan, he nodded. If she asked a question, he shrugged. If she expressed worry, he'd simply say, "Don't stress about it." It should have been comforting, but instead it felt like living with a ghost, someone physically present but emotionally unreachable. On one particular afternoon, she watched him from across the room, noticing how distant he seemed despite being only a few feet away. His eyes weren't on her. They were somewhere else entirely. She wondered if he was replaying a memory, planning something, or simply drifting away from the life they'd built together. She didn't know, and she didn't ask. Because a part of her feared the answer. Sometimes silence in a relationship isn't peaceful, it's suffocating. And she was slowly beginning to feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, though she still couldn't name the feeling. Not yet. Still, she tried to convince herself everything was normal, that the unease itching at her thoughts was nothing more than stress or fatigue or the unpredictable rhythm of married life. She threw herself into work, into cleaning, into organizing drawers that didn't really need organizing, anything to distract her from the growing tension she couldn't quite put a finger on. On the surface, everything looked fine. The house was tidy, dinners were made, their conversations polite and predictable. But beneath that quiet surface was a silence that felt too heavy, too deliberate. She found herself listening for changes in his breathing at night, glancing at him during meals to catch even a flicker of the man she once knew so effortlessly. She wanted desperately to believe that what they had was still intact, that whatever he was hiding, whatever storm was brewing inside him, it would pass without damage. She had no way of knowing that storms don't always come with thunder or dramatic warnings. Sometimes they build slowly, quietly, gathering force in the smallest shadows, and when they finally strike, they don't just shake the house. They change everything built inside it. If she had recognized the signs sooner, maybe she would have braced herself. Maybe she would have asked harder questions. Maybe she would have been ready. But she wasn't, and the storm that was coming would tear open a truth far more devastating than she could ever imagine. The shift didn't happen overnight. It unfolded slowly, like paint peeling from a wall you thought was perfectly smooth. At first, she noticed the small things. He began spending more time away from home, offering vague explanations that didn't quite match his tone. Just a late meeting, he'd mumble while avoiding her eyes. Or, I need to help a friend. Simple excuses, yet each one sat heavily in her stomach. She wasn't naive. She knew when someone was dodging the truth. And yet, she chose patience over panic. She told herself relationships go through seasons, that people sometimes withdraw for reasons that have nothing to do with love. But there's a difference between temporary distance and deliberate disconnection, and he was drifting with a kind of unsettling purpose. One evening, she returned home early and found him startled, almost guilty, as he hurried to lock his phone screen. His hands shook, just a little, but enough to make her heart lurch. When she asked what he was doing, he gave that same empty smile he'd been wearing for weeks, the one that never reached his eyes. She didn't ask again. But the question lingered, quietly poisoning the space between them. It became harder to ignore, the emotional divide growing wider with each passing day. Conversations that once flowed naturally turned stiff, like dialogues they were both performing rather than living. He avoided simple questions. How was your day? What's bothering you? Is everything okay? As if answering them required revealing a truth he wasn't ready to confront. Nights grew stranger. He'd lie awake long after she fell asleep, or so she thought, until she began waking up to find him missing from their bed entirely. She'd hear soft footsteps downstairs, drawers opening, papers rustling. Every sound made her wonder what he was hiding. Or worse, who he was hiding it from. At breakfast, she'd try to catch his expression, searching for clues in the lines of his face. But he'd sit there with that distant stare, stirring his coffee without drinking it, like he was trapped inside a version of himself he didn't know how to escape. She wanted to reach out, to shake him, to demand the truth, but she also feared what that truth might be. Asking the right questions can feel like stepping off a cliff when you're not ready to face what's waiting at the bottom. Her friends noticed the tension before she fully admitted it to herself. During a casual lunch, one of them asked, "Is everything okay at home? You seem distracted." She tried to laugh it off, but the words stung. Because distraction wasn't the problem, it was dread. A quiet growing dread that seeped into everything she did. Even her grandmother, who rarely interfered in her personal life, sensed the shift. "You don't look at peace," she said gently over the phone. "Has something changed?" But what could she say? That her husband had become a stranger in the same house. That she felt watched when he walked into a room, not because he cared, but because he was calculating something she couldn't understand. She didn't want to sound melodramatic. And yet, late at night, she'd sit up in bed and replay their early years, the laughter, the conversations that never needed explanations, the closeness that felt effortless. Now, even sharing a room felt like standing on opposite sides of a fault line. The distance between them was no longer emotional, it was physical too. He'd sit at the far edge of the couch, turn away during sleep, flinch at her touch as if affection had suddenly become unbearable. Still, she tried to stay hopeful, because hope is what people cling to when their reality starts shifting beneath them. She planned a small weekend trip, hoping a change of scenery might soften whatever hard edges had formed between them. But when she suggested it, he didn't hesitate. He dismissed it immediately, claiming he had too much going on and didn't have time for distractions. Distractions. That was how he described a chance to reconnect with his own wife. As she watched him walk out the door that evening, something inside her cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, but quietly, like a thread snapping under too much tension. She stood alone in the hallway, realizing that she was no longer imagining the distance. It was real, it was deliberate. And it was growing. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if this wasn't just a phase, but a warning. A sign that something deeper, darker, and far more permanent was taking shape. She didn't know it yet, but the storm clouds were gathering quietly, waiting for their moment to break. And when they finally did, they would reveal a secret powerful enough to shatter everything she thought she knew about the man she married. The night it all began felt strangely heavy, as if the air itself was warning her to pay attention. The sky had been threatening rain since morning, a grayness clinging to the horizon like it was waiting for the right moment to collapse. By evening, the wind had picked up, brushing against the windows with long, uneasy sighs. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner, chopping vegetables while humming a tune she didn't really feel. He walked in briefly, muttered something she couldn't make out, and disappeared just as quickly. No kiss on the cheek, no casual conversation, just a cloud of tension trailing behind him. She paused, knife hovering above the cutting board, really sensing that something was different about him tonight. His movements were sharp, jittery, like a man carrying a secret too heavy for its hiding place. And for the first time in weeks, instead of burying her curiosity, she felt an inexplicable need to watch closely. The storm outside and the storm within her home seemed to align, as if nature itself was mirroring everything she'd been refusing to face. As the first raindrops tapped against the windows, she found him sitting in the living room, staring at nothing. Just starng. Not at the TV, not at his phone, not even at the storm beginning to take shape outside. His eyes were fixed on the floor, unfocused, like he was rehearsing a conversation he dreaded having. She sat across from him quietly, studying the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped against the armrest with restless energy. "Is everything okay?" she finally asked, her voice gentle, cautious like approaching a wounded animal. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he let out a long exhale, one that sounded like surrender. When he finally did respond, his words were clipped. "I just need space," he muttered. Space, a word that landed in her chest like a stone. She wanted to ask what kind of space, why now, what changed. But his expression warned her not to push. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room for a brief second, and in that flicker of brightness, she saw something she had never seen in him before: fear. Not fear of her, but fear of something closing in around him. The storm intensified quickly, rain lashing against the house with a force that made the walls tremble. She tried to focus on mundane tasks, folding blankets, checking the windows, adjusting the thermostat, but her mind kept circling back to him. When she returned to the living room, he was no longer there. A strange stillness settled over the house, broken only by the rumbling thunder outside. She found him upstairs, standing by the bedroom window, watching the storm as if searching for answers in the chaos. This time when she approached him, he didn't move away. He didn't move at all. "Talk to me," she whispered, placing a hand on his back, his body tensed beneath her touch. For a moment, she thought he might finally open up, unravel whatever heavy truth had been pulling him away from her. But instead, he stepped forward, away from her hand, away from the question, away from any possibility of closeness. "I said I need space," he repeated, but this time his tone carried an edge, sharp, almost defensive. She swallowed the lump forming in her throat, realizing that this wasn't just about stress or exhaustion. Something inside him was breaking. Or already broken up by the time the power flickered, plunging the house into brief darkness. The atmosphere between them had shifted into something raw and unfamiliar. She lit a small candle, its flame trembling with each gust of wind that rattled the windows. The silence between them felt louder than the thunder crashing outside. She tried one last time, her voice soft but steady. "Whatever is happening, we can face it together." For a split second, she thought she saw guilt flash across his face, quick, fleeting, but unmistakable. Then he turned away, almost violently, as if her words struck a nerve he couldn't afford to expose. He stormed downstairs without explanation, leaving her standing alone in the dim glow of candlelight. She followed a few minutes later, uneasy, drawn by instinct rather than logic. And that's when she saw it. Him standing at the back door, hand gripping the knob with a strange finality. The wind howled as he pulled the door open, cold rain spraying inside the house. She didn't know it yet, but this decision, this one unexplainable act, would mark the moment her life split into before and after. The night wasn't just shifting, it was unraveling. And with it, the truth he had tried so desperately to bury. She didn't immediately understand what he was doing. At first, she thought he was just checking the weather or trying to gauge the strength of the storm. The rain poured down in heavy sheets, blurring the backyard into a gray curtain of chaos. But then she noticed the way his shoulders were squared, how stiffly he stood like someone preparing for something irreversible. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm's roar. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the strange emptiness in his expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was vacancy. A hollow look that chilled her more than the cold air rushing through the open doorway. She stepped closer, instinctively reaching out. But before she could speak again, he placed a hand on her arm, guiding her no, pushing her toward the threshold. The shock of the rain hitting her skin made her gasp. She whipped around to face him, confused, stunned. "Why are you?" But the question never finished. With one effortless motion, he released her arm, stepped back, and the door swung shut between them. The slam echoed louder than the thunder. For a moment, she stood frozen on the doorstep, drenched within seconds, her heartbeat pounding louder than the storm. She stared at the door, expecting it to open again, expecting him to smile awkwardly, say it was a misunderstanding, pull her back inside. But nothing happened. The porch light flickered above her, casting a trembling glow on the wet ground, and she suddenly felt very small under the sky's violent rage. She pressed her palms against the door, knocking lightly at first, believing he simply panicked or acted impulsively. "Open the door!" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. No movement. She knocked harder. "This isn't funny, please, open the door." Still nothing. Her breath trembled as she leaned her forehead against the wooden frame, cold rain dripping down her face like tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed yet. It was only when she tried the doorknob and felt it locked, actually locked, that her anxiety turned into something sharper. A piercing mix of fear and disbelief. Never in her life had she imagined the man she married would choose to shut her out, literally and emotionally, in the middle of a raging storm. It didn't feel like a dramatic moment in a story. It felt like betrayal made real. The wind howled, whipping her hair across her face as lightning tore open the sky. She stepped back from the door, hugging her arms around herself against the cold. The house, her home, looked unfamiliar from the outside, darkened windows staring back at her like indifferent eyes. She knocked again, louder this time, pounding with a desperation she could no longer contain. "Please," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Talk to me. Just talk to me." But the storm swallowed her words before they even reached the door. The rain was relentless, soaking through her clothes, chilling her skin until her fingers went numb. She felt foolish, exposed, vulnerable, in a way she had never experienced. A sudden, overwhelming realization hit her. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of panic or confusion. He made a choice. And the weight of that choice pressed down on her chest with suffocating force. She had never felt danger around him, not real danger, but now, standing alone in the storm he locked her into, she sensed something broken in him. Something unpredictable. Something she should have seen signs of long before this night. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, and at some point her desperation shifted into a numb, heavy silence. She stopped knocking. Stopped calling his name. She simply stood there, shivering under the pounding rain, staring at the door as if hoping it would magically open. But houses don't change their minds, people do if they want to. She stepped off the porch, needing space to breathe, needing distance from the reality pressing against her heart. The backyard lights flickered as thunder shook the ground, and she realized that this moment, this cold, merciless moment, was the breaking point. Whatever she thought her marriage was, whatever she believed about the man inside that house, it collapsed with that locked door. As lightning illuminated the yard, she caught a glimpse of something unexpected, a figure near the fence line watching. She blinked, unsure if it was real or a trick of the storm. But no, it was real. Someone was there. And in that instant, she realized the night was far from over. The storm outside wasn't the only one she needed to fear. The storm of truth was coming next, and it had witnesses. At first, she thought her eyes were deceiving her. The yard was a blur of rain and darkness, the storm twisting everything into shifting silhouettes. But as another bolt of lightning cracked across the sky, the figure became unmistakably real. Someone was standing near the fence still, almost unnaturally still, watching her. A chill crawled up her spine, sharper than the cold rain clinging to her skin. She wasn't sure whether to call out or to run, but fear held her silent. Who would be outside at this hour, in this weather, standing so close yet saying nothing? The figure didn't move toward her or away. It remained rooted in place, just far enough to be obscured, but close enough to make its presence undeniable. She took a hesitant step back toward the porch, torn between the safety of the overhang and the dread of what or who was in her yard. "Hello?" she called out finally, her voice trembling. No response. Just the relentless sound of rain hammering the earth. A moment later, the figure shifted slightly, as though startled by her voice. Or startled that she noticed them at all. And just like that, an entirely new layer of fear settled around her brittle heart. When the figure finally stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a stranger, not completely. The faint outline, the posture, the way they hesitated before moving closer. It felt familiar, but she couldn't place it. Not until the next flash of lightning revealed the unmistakable face of a young neighbor boy, someone who often helped mow lawns in the summer, someone harmless, someone she never imagined would be lurking behind her fence on a night like this. His clothes were soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his expression wide with shock. Are you okay?" He shouted over the storm, his voice cracking under the weight of terror he wasn't even trying to hide. She was too stunned to answer at first. Why was he here? How long had he been watching? Had he seen everything, her being shoved outside, the door slamming, the lock clicking? His gaze darted between her and the house, and for a split second, she saw something like guilt flicker across his face, or was it fear? "I didn't mean to scare you," he continued. I heard shouting. I saw you fall back when the door closed. I wasn't sure if I should do something." She swallowed hard, glancing back at the darkened windows of her home. A mix of embarrassment, relief, and dread churned within her. She didn't want anyone to see her like this, drenched, trembling, rejected by the very person who should have protected her. But at the same time, she felt a strange comfort in knowing someone else had witnessed what happened. She wasn't imagining it, she wasn't overreacting. The boy's presence validated her pain in a way she desperately needed but would never have asked for. "Did you see everything?" she finally managed to whisper. The boy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Most of it," he admitted. I was coming by to return something." But when I got close, I heard arguing. Then I saw him push you out." The words hit her like another storm surge, knocking the breath from her lungs. Hearing it out loud, "He pushed you out," made the truth unavoidable. She felt her chest tighten, tears mixing with the rain already streaming down her face. "Why didn't he let you back in?" the boy asked, voice trembling with confusion and anger he didn't understand. She didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. Not one that healed the growing fracture tearing through her life. Before she could respond, a sudden movement inside the house caught both their attention. A shadow flickered behind the curtains, and she instinctively stepped back, heart hammering. The boy's eyes widened, sensing danger he couldn't name. The door didn't open, but something about the way the lights shifted inside made her realize one chilling truth. Her husband was still watching. Maybe he knew she wasn't alone now. Maybe he realized someone had witnessed what he'd done. Maybe that made him angry, or maybe it made him afraid. Either way, the air seemed to thicken with tension. The boy stepped forward protectively, though he was clearly terrified. "You shouldn't stay out here," he said softly. "It's not safe." She wanted to laugh at the irony. Nothing about this night was safe. Not inside, not outside, not anywhere in between. But before she could respond, headlights appeared from the corner of the street, slowly approaching, cutting through the storm with a steady glow. She blinked, breath hitching in her throat. That car, that familiar shape. That was her grandmother's car. A wave of relief and dread washed over her all at once. Because if her grandmother was here on a night like this, then the truth must be bigger, deeper, and darker than she ever dared to imagine. Her grandmother's car rolled to a stop at the curb, headlights casting long beams across the flooded street. In any other moment, she would have wondered why her grandmother, who rarely drove at night and never in storms, was even out here. But tonight wasn't normal. Nothing about this night had been normal from the moment she'd been shoved into the rain. As the engine cut off, the door swung open, and her grandmother stepped out with a determination that didn't match her age. A scarf was tied tightly under her chin, her coat buttoned to the top, but it was the expression on her face that stunned her. Not confusion, not worry. Certainty, as if she already knew exactly what had happened. As if she had expected it. The storm whipped around them, but her grandmother moved through it with an almost eerie steadiness. "Come here," she called out, her voice firm but gentle. The moment she stepped into her grandmother's arms, warmth flooded through her, relief, safety, a fragile sense of belonging she had been starving for all night. And yet, beneath the comfort, a new question blossomed. Why was she here? And how did she know to come? The neighbor boy hovered awkwardly by the fence, unsure whether to leave or stay. Her grandmother glanced at him, eyes sharp and assessing, absorbing everything in a single sweep. "Go home, sweetheart. You've done enough," she said to him, not unkindly, but with a tone that left no room for argument. The boy hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the storm, clutching his soaked hoodie close. As soon as he was gone, her grandmother turned fully toward the house, examining it with an expression she had never seen before, one of quiet fury mixed with resignation. She followed her gaze, feeling exposed under its weight. "Did he put you out here?" her grandmother asked, though the answer was obvious. Her voice broke as she whispered, "He locked the door." For a moment, her grandmother said nothing. She simply closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and shook her head with a sadness too old and too heavy to belong to this moment alone. "I was afraid this day would come," she murmured. Those words cut deeper than anything her husband had done, because they hinted at history, at knowledge. At secrets her grandmother had kept silently folded away for reasons she could suddenly feel pressing against the edges of the night. Her grandmother placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Listen to me," she said softly but with undeniable authority. "Whatever you saw tonight, whatever he did, this isn't new." The rain seemed to quiet for a moment, as if the storm itself paused to hear the truth. She stared at her grandmother, stunned. "What do you mean, isn't new?" Her grandmother's lips tightened. "I didn't tell you before because I hoped he had changed. People sometimes do. But patterns rarely do. She felt a chill crawl down her soaked spine, colder than the wind whipping through her wet clothes. What patterns? She pressed, voice trembling. Her grandmother looked toward the house again, eyes narrowing. He has always had shadows inside him. Darkness he hides until the moment it demands space. Don't mistake gentleness for safety, child. Some men learn to mimic kindness so they can mask the storm underneath. The words hit like thunder. She had spent years believing her marriage was built on trust, on peace, on quiet compatibility. But now, in the middle of a storm raging in the sky and inside her heart, she began to question everything she thought she knew about the man she lived with, slept beside, loved. Her grandmother stepped closer, gripping her shoulders with surprising strength. Rain dripped from the edge of her scarf, lightning casting flickering shadows across her face. What he showed you tonight, her grandmother said, is who he really is when he thinks no one is watching. And once a person reveals their truth, you don't ignore it. You don't excuse it. You don't wait for it to happen again. She swallowed hard, tears blending with raindrops. What am I supposed to do? She whispered. Her grandmother didn't hesitate not for a second. You leave, she said, her voice steady, unwavering. You walk away from this house, from this man, and from whatever secret he thinks he can hide behind that locked door. Because your safety is worth more than his pride. The words struck her like a final, devastating truth. For the first time that night, she felt something shift, not fear, not confusion. Clarity. Her grandmother had arrived not to comfort her, not to rescue her, but to deliver a truth she had been avoiding for far too long. And as thunder rolled through the sky, she realized the storm outside wasn't here to punish her. It was here to reveal everything she needed to see. She had always believed that truth revealed itself slowly through subtle hints, quiet moments, or slips in someone's behavior. But the truth about her husband didn't unfold gently. It came crashing down like a second storm layered on top of the one still raging across the sky. After guiding her to her grandmother's car, her grandmother insisted they sit inside, shielding her from the rain. The heater hummed softly, but she still felt cold, as if the chill had seeped beneath her skin. Her grandmother's face appeared older in the dim cabin light, edged with a weariness she had never noticed before. After a deep breath, she began, Your husband, he wasn't always like the man you met. There were pieces of him he hid from the world. Pieces he hid from you. The air thickened. She felt her heartbeat thud against her ribs. What do you mean? She whispered. Her grandmother hesitated not out of uncertainty, but out of the painful inevitability of the words she was about to speak. Before you ever knew him, before he ever courted you, there were incidents. Episodes of anger he couldn't control. Times he shut people out, pushed them away, sometimes violently. Her stomach twisted. She couldn't reconcile this version of him with the quiet man she married. But a haunting thought slipped through her mind. Perhaps the quietness was never peace. Only suppression. Her grandmother continued, her voice steady but somber. He comes from a family with shadows. His father, his grandfather. Men who believed silence solved everything. Men who believed that showing emotion was weakness, and control was the only form of strength. She stared at the windshield, the rain blurring into streaks of silver under the streetlight. Memories flashed through her mind, his stiff posture when upset, the way he shut down during serious conversations, the emptiness in his eyes when confronted. Signs she once interpreted as introversion or stress suddenly took on a darker meaning. But why didn't you tell me? She asked, a tremor of anger breaking through her shock. Her grandmother sighed. Because he convinced me he had changed, because you loved him, and because I wanted to believe that the man he was becoming was stronger than the man he used to be. Lightning lit the sky, illuminating her grandmother's regret-lined face. But people don't change, she murmured bitterly. Not until they are forced to, and sometimes, not even then. The truth settled over her like a weight she couldn't shake off. She realized the distance, the strange behavior, the sudden defensiveness, all of it had roots stretching long before their marriage. He hadn't changed. He had only hidden. Just as she began to process the revelation, her grandmother leaned closer, lowering her voice. There is something else. A pulse of dread rippled through her. Those words "something else" felt like the final twist of a knife. About 2 months ago, her grandmother continued, someone contacted me. Someone who knew him from years back. Her breath caught. Why didn't you tell me? Her grandmother's eyes softened with apology. Because I prayed it was nothing, but the message. It warned me that he was slipping again, that he was withdrawing from people. Becoming secretive, showing signs of instability. Her pulse quickened. Instability. Her grandmother's next words chilled her to the bone. And they said something else too, that when he feels cornered, when he feels he's losing control, he lashes out. She felt her throat tighten. That look in his eyes earlier, the emptiness, the simmering frustration suddenly made sense. The storm hadn't triggered his behavior, the storm had simply revealed it. So he locked me out, because he felt cornered, she whispered. Her grandmother gave a sorrowful nod. Because somewhere inside him, he believed shutting you out was the only way to regain control. But that's not a mistake, child. That's a pattern. Silence filled the car, broken only by the muffled rumble of thunder. She pressed her palms to her face, trying to hold herself together as the reality of her marriage unraveled. She thought of every moment she ignored, every uneasy feeling she brushed aside, every time she convinced herself he was just stressed or tired. All of it now formed a mosaic of truth she couldn't unsee. Her grandmother reached over and gently squeezed her hand. You cannot save someone who refuses to confront the darkness inside them, she said softly. And you cannot lose yourself trying. Her tears fell freely now, not just from heartbreak but from a profound sense of betrayal, not only by him but by the version of herself who had trusted so blindly. She stared out into the storm, the house looming in the distance like a dark silhouette hiding secrets she no longer wished to uncover. So what do I do now? She whispered. Her grandmother's response was immediate, unwavering. You walk away. Tonight. Do not step back into that house. The finality of those words shook her, but it also grounded her. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the truth settle. The storm didn't destroy her marriage, it exposed it. And now, standing at the edge of everything she once believed, she realized she couldn't bury the truth any longer. Because some secrets aren't meant to be forgotten, they're meant to be escaped. Even after learning the truth, part of her still felt tethered to the house she once believed was her safe place. It stood there in the storm, dark and unmoving, like a silent witness to everything that had gone wrong. Her grandmother's warning echoed loudly in her mind, but something inside her needed closure, needed answers. She couldn't just walk away without confronting the man she had shared years of her life with. So, against her grandmother's pleas, she stepped out of the car and began walking toward the house. Every step felt heavier than the last, rain striking her skin like tiny needles. The air buzzed with an eerie tension, as though the storm itself was holding its breath. She reached the porch, water dripping from her hair, her clothes clinging to her skin. Her hand hovered above the doorknob, cold, slick with rain, and she realized she wasn't shaking from the weather. She was shaking from the truth, from the anticipation, from the fear of what she might find when she stepped inside. But she swallowed her trembling, turned the knob, and pushed. The door creaked open into a vacuum of silence. No sound of footsteps, no rustling, no breathing. The house felt suffocatingly still, as if it too was bracing for what was coming next. She stepped inside slowly, her wet shoes leaving faint tracks on the hardwood floor. The lights flickered overhead, casting the hallway in a sickly yellow glow. Are you here? She called out, voice wavering. No response. She moved deeper into the house, heart pounding harder with each step. She found him in the living room, sitting on the couch with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. He didn't look up, not even when she approached. Rainwater dripped from her clothes onto the rug, but he didn't move. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched taut between them, fragile and dangerous. Finally, she broke it. "Why?" she whispered. He didn't flinch, didn't breathe, didn't react in any recognizable way. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were hollow. Not angry, not confused, empty, as though the storm had hollowed him out from the inside. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. The calmness in his voice scared her more than any shout could have. She stepped back instinctively, but he rose to his feet, and the energy in the room shifted instantly. "I told you I needed space," he said, voice sharper now, strained. "But you never listen." She opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off, running a hand through his hair in agitation. "Everything has been falling apart. Everything. And you," he choked on the words, pacing the room like an animal trapped in a cage. She watched him carefully, her heartbeat racing. This was not the man she loved. This was someone unraveling in real time. "I tried to keep it together," he muttered. "I tried to hold it all in. But you kept asking, kept pushing, kept seeing things I didn't want you to see." She felt her stomach twist. "Seeing what?" she asked. He stopped pacing and turned toward her, and in that instant, she understood why her grandmother had warned her so fiercely. His expression wasn't one of remorse, it was one of blame, of resentment. Of a man who believed his own wife had backed him into a corner. As he stepped closer, she felt the full weight of the moment settle over her like the storm clouds above. She wasn't safe here, not emotionally, not physically, not in any sense of the word. But she also wasn't the same woman who had begged at the door earlier in the night. Something inside her had shifted, broken maybe, but in a way that let the truth finally seep through. She stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching. "This isn't my fault," she said, voice trembling but steady. "Your choices, your secrets, your anger, that's not on me." He froze, stunned by her defiance. For the first time, he seemed uncertain, thrown off balance by her refusal to shrink. The power dynamic between them shifted ever so slightly. She felt it. He felt it. The house felt it. Lightning crashed outside, illuminating the room in a stark white flash. In that burst of light, she saw everything clearly. She couldn't stay, not for answers, not for closure, not for the version of love she once believed existed here. The breaking point wasn't a fight, it was a realization. And as she stepped backward toward the door, she whispered the last words she would ever say to him in that house. "I'm done." When she stepped outside, the storm had finally begun to weaken. The rain softened from violent lashes to a steady drizzle, and the thunder faded into distant grumbles, like a beast exhausted from its own rage. It felt symbolic, nature releasing its final sigh just as she released hers. Her grandmother was still waiting in the car, eyes wide with worry, hands gripping the steering wheel though the engine was off. The moment their eyes met, her grandmother exhaled as though she'd been holding her breath for hours. "Are you all right?" she whispered. She didn't trust her voice enough to answer, so she simply nodded and opened the passenger door. As soon as she got inside, the warmth of the car wrapped around her like a much-needed embrace, but it couldn't thaw the chilling truth embedded in her bones. She stared out the window at the house, the home she thought she'd build a life in, and felt a strange sense of detachment. It wasn't hers anymore. It never truly had been. She tightened the seatbelt and whispered, "Let's go." And with that, her grandmother started the car, guiding them away from the place she once believed was her future. They drove in silence at first, the windshield wipers swishing rhythmically across the glass. She watched droplets race each other down the window, their paths merging, splitting, disappearing at random, much like the pieces of her life that now felt scattered beyond recognition. Her grandmother reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "You did the right thing," she said softly. But the words didn't settle easily. A part of her still felt guilty, not for leaving him but for not seeing sooner what everyone else seemed to sense. She wondered how long her grandmother had carried the weight of knowing. How many times she'd wanted to speak but held back out of love, or fear, or hope. The guilt twisted deeper. "I should have noticed," she murmured. "I should have known something was wrong." Her grandmother shook her head. You loved him. And love often clouds the places we should examine most closely. She leaned back in her seat, letting her grandmother's words sink in. The truth was simple but painful. She had given him grace, patience, understanding things he never once offered her in return. And now she was left sorting through the wreckage of a relationship built on a foundation she'd never realized was cracked from the start. By the time they reached her grandmother's house, the storm had passed completely, leaving a stillness that felt almost eerie. The world looked washed clean, as if nature had painted over the chaos of the night with a fresh coat of quiet. But inside her, nothing felt settled. She stepped into the familiar old living room, the worn rug, the soft yellow lamps, the framed photos lining the shelves, and felt a wave of safety crash softly against her. Yet the comfort almost made her cry harder. Safety shouldn't feel foreign. Her grandmother handed her a towel and washed her carefully, knowing better than to flood her with questions. She dried her hair mechanically, her body moving on autopilot. Then, almost without warning, the tears came. Quiet at first, then uncontrollable. Her grandmother held her as she shook, whispering gentle reassurances she could barely process. Hours passed like minutes, or maybe minutes passed like hours, she couldn't tell. But eventually the storm inside her settled into something calmer, something more bearable. She realized she wasn't crying only for what she had lost. She was crying for the version of herself who tolerated so much, stayed so long, believed so deeply, even when the truth was staring back with hollow eyes. The following morning brought an unexpected clarity. Sunlight streamed through the curtain edges, soft and warm, touching the room like a quiet apology. She sat on the edge of the bed her grandmother had prepared for her, staring at the patch of light on the floor. It struck her that healing wouldn't come in dramatic moments, it would come in small ones like this. Moments of calm after surviving something that should have broken her. She checked her phone, uncertain of what she'd find. There were no messages from him. No missed calls, no apologies, no pleas for her return. The silence was its own answer, and strangely, she felt relieved. His absence spoke louder than any words he could have offered. It told her everything she needed to know about the road ahead. She breathed slowly, deeply, for the first time in what felt like years. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained, etched into the parts of her she was only beginning to rebuild. She wasn't healed yet, but she was no longer drowning. And as she stepped into her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of warm tea filling the air, she realized something profound. Sometimes survival isn't loud or triumphant. Sometimes it's simply choosing to keep walking even after the sky has fallen. Healing didn't arrive in a sudden epiphany or some grand moment of revelation. It unfolded quietly, almost shyly, in the small decisions she made each day, waking up without panic, drinking tea without trembling hands, looking in the mirror and recognizing the woman staring back, not the broken, frightened version she had been in the storm, but the woman who had walked away from a place that no longer deserved her. Her grandmother became her anchor, offering simple comforts. A warm meal, a knowing smile, hands that held without demanding words. Slowly she began reclaiming pieces of her life. She unpacked her belongings one item at a time, not rushing the process but letting each object find a new place in this safer, gentler environment. For the first time in years, she slept deeply without listening for footsteps or waiting for emotional shifts she couldn't predict. It was strange how quickly the body learned to rest once the mind stopped bracing for impact. Every morning, she found herself breathing a little easier, as though the storm had scrubbed away not just the chaos, but the illusion she had trapped herself in. But healing also brought confrontation, not with him, but with the memories she carried. She found herself replaying moments from their marriage, trying to understand how she had missed the signs. She remembered the quiet dinners where he seemed lost in thought, the nights he stayed awake staring at the ceiling, the deflection in his eyes whenever she asked about his past. Each memory felt like a puzzle piece she hadn't known how to fit back then. Now, with distance, she could finally see the bigger picture. It hurt not because of the betrayal itself, but because she had loved him with a sincerity he never learned to reciprocate. Her heart had always been all in. His had always been half withheld. Some days, the weight of that truth hit her harder than expected. She would sit by the kitchen window, staring at the sunlight on the garden, wondering if things could have been different. But her grandmother would gently remind her, regret is a heavy coat. Wear it too long, and it becomes your skin. So she practiced letting go bit by bit, memory by memory, until the ache transformed into something softer, something survivable. Weeks passed, and life began to feel recognizable again. She returned to work, rediscovered hobbies she had abandoned, and reconnected with friends she had unintentionally drifted from during her marriage. People noticed the change in her, the light returning to her eyes, the softness in her voice, the way she no longer walked like someone trying to shrink herself into the background. One afternoon, she found herself laughing, really laughing for the first time in months. It startled her. It startled everyone. But it also signaled something important. She was coming back to herself. The version of her that existed before the storm wasn't gone, just misplaced. Rebuilding wasn't about creating a brand new life. It was about finding the pieces worth keeping and releasing the ones that had never belonged to her. Sometimes she wondered if he ever felt remorse or reflection. Whether he was sitting in that quiet house, staring at the door he had locked, replaying the moment everything fell apart. But she no longer waited for answers. His silence no longer felt like a wound, it felt like closure. Months later, when the world had settled into a rhythm that felt bearable, she stood outside one morning watching the sunrise. The sky glowed in muted shades of gold and pink, nothing dramatic, just calm. And that's when she realized the truth she had spent so long searching for. Healing wasn't about forgetting the storm. It was about understanding that she survived it. She had walked through betrayal, fear, heartbreak, and uncertainty, and still she was here, clearer, more herself than she had ever been. Her grandmother wrapped an arm around her shoulders and whispered, "Storms don't break the strong, sweetheart. They reveal them." And for the first time, she believed it. She looked toward the road ahead, unmapped, unpredictable, entirely hers, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, not the fragile kind that depends on someone else's actions, but the kind that grows from within, steady and resilient. She stepped forward, one quiet breath after another, knowing she was finally ready to rebuild not what was lost, but what was waiting.